Hey guys, Mike here with EBR. Now, one of the coolest things about e-bikes becoming so popular is that it's got a lot of people back outside, and more importantly, back out on bikes. But not everyone's looking to crush Strava segments or zip in and out of traffic on two wheels. Sometimes you just want to go for a roll around the neighborhood, maybe take your pets in the back and go for a cruise, or just pick up some groceries, and not worry about things like balance, stability, or jumping on and off a two-wheeled bike. And that's exactly where the Mokwheel Granite comes in. Now, I've been testing this all week and I've got some thoughts on where it shines and where it could have some improvements. So stick around and let's do a deep dive on the Mokwheel Granite electric tricycle. All right, so the Mokwheel Granite ships as a Class 2 bike, meaning it's capped at 20 miles an hour. Now, if you're thinking to yourself 20 miles an hour is kind of fast for a trike, you would be right. We usually see these things capped at 15, but this one can go up to 20. But we certainly recommend you just dialing it back down to lower speeds, especially in the early days while you're getting used to the bike. But it's still nice to know that once you're comfortable, you do have that extra power and speed should you be hauling or should you just be on a nice open flat stretch. Just be careful in those corners because high speeds and tricycles don't usually end well. But with that said, let's talk about the weight. So this bike weighs 100 pounds, or at least that's what it's advertised as. I threw this up on the scale when I got it for testing and it came in right at 99.6, so right at that 100-pound mark. And then I took the battery out, weighed it by itself, and the battery weighs 9.6 pounds. Now, this is a one size fits most, so it's going to fit riders from 5 foot flat all the way up to 6'2". Now, I'm 5'11", and it fit me just fine, although I felt a little big on the bike, but I had no problem with pedal extension, reach, and frankly, comfort. So all in all, it did fit me, even at that higher end. Now, it comes in two colors. This is the gray color that has black accents, but they also have what they call steel blue, which is a light metallic blue, kind of like a car paint job, and that also will have the same black accents. Now, the max payload on this is 350 pounds, and some geo numbers for this. The standover height is about 15 inches, so that's a nice easy on, easy off height where you don't really need to be too concerned about balance, stability, and supporting two wheels while you throw your leg over. Really nice on a nice open frame like this. You've got an 18-inch reach up top, about 7 inches of adjustability in the seat post, and then you have a wheelbase from the rear axle centered up to the front hub, and that's going to be about 43 inches. Now, these two rear wheels on this trike are a little bit more narrow than we usually see, and we think that's probably because it's a folding trike. So you can fold this bike up, and I will do a demonstration in just a second and kind of give you those dimensions and how that process works. But we think that's part of the reason why the wheelbase in the rear is just a little bit more narrow. Now, that does something to the handling of the bike. A slightly more narrow rear two wheels, if you're at a higher speed when cornering, now on a trike, it's already kind of something you need to be not nervous about, but something you need to be aware of because higher speeds and cornering don't usually mesh well. But when you have a more narrow two rear wheels, that gets compounded just a bit, plus the higher speed this trike offers. So what I'm just telling myself and what I did when I started, and I'm gonna just kind of advise you guys to do, is if you do end up with this, go ahead and just reduce the speeds down, and I'll show you in the display section how to do that. And that will just let you get used to the bike, get used to the feel, get used to the cornering and the counterbalancing, because while trikes are super stable and really just comfortable to cruise around on, there is that small learning curve of cornering, especially at speeds, and the general rule of thumb, if it's your first time riding, is just to keep it slow in the corners. Now, when it comes to tires and wheels, they went with a 20-inch alloy wheel, and it's got a 3-inch wide tire, so 20 by 3-inch tires. And these tires have a nice commuter slick tread on them, but they still have the value, or excuse me, the comfort of a 3-inch wide tire. So you can actually air down just a little bit. Plus you have a front suspension fork, and between all three wide tires and that suspension fork, plus the suspension seat post, comfort is not really an issue on this bike. It's very comfortable. Now, when it comes to fenders, they did include fenders on all three wheels. These are a PVC, like plastic feeling, and they are alloy, or excuse me, and they are black, not alloy. But I think PVC plastic fenders generally do better on e-bikes over, say, a metal or alloy fender, because they're just going to be able to, you can knock that around, you can bump it in accidentally to things, and it's not going to bend, and it's certainly not going to rust over time. So while they may be less expensive, I actually think they're a better fit on most e-bikes. Now, this being a trike, it's going to come with a large cargo basket here, and that's going to be rated to carry about 220 pounds, but keeping in mind the total max payload of 350 pounds. So you can put up to 220 here, but that's going to limit your rider weight to about 130, as long as you stay in the 350 max payload. Now, when it comes to mounting points for more accessories or gear, they have a mounting point up front for a front basket that can hold up to 55 pounds, and then that's going to be it. There's no extra mounting points on the frame, no water bottle cages, but when you've got a giant cargo box and a room for a front basket, you still have plenty of options to kind of take your gear and accessorize it the way you see fit. And finally, when it comes to lighting, they did provide a front headlight up front. It's a nice wide round headlight with a good LED brightness to it. Now, on the website and in the marketing material, they don't list how bright as far as like lumens or lux that this light is, but I can confidently say, just riding it around and using it in day-to-day times, that it's good for being seen on the road and out on the trail. It's going to let other people know you're coming, and people behind you can see with the tail light. But I don't know how good it's going to be in a very low light condition or nighttime riding, but nonetheless, it's great for daytime visibility, and I think it excelled there. Now, in the rear, you do have a tail light that also turns on when you activate the headlight, and that also will act as a brake light when you activate the brakes. So all in all, you've got your front to rear lighting taken care of, as well as things like your cargo areas and fenders for just practical everyday getting around town. Now, when it comes to the motor and battery on the Mokwheel Granite, they went with a 500-watt rear hub motor that's actually centrally mounted on the axle between the two rear wheels. Now, it's rated at 500 watts nominally, but it can peak at up to 860 watts and has a very respectable 65 Newton meters of torque. Now, I think going with 65 Newton meters of torque and having that higher peaked rating for the wattage on the motor was a good choice for a bike of this size. It weighs about 100 pounds, and it's going to have you and your gear or you and your pet in it with it as well. So handling things like hills, getting up to speed when you want it, those are all going to be there thanks to the kind of slightly bumped up specs for an electric trike. Now, when it comes to speed and things like that, that's an area of contention for a lot of folks, especially on a trike. Now, usually we see trikes limited to about 15 miles an hour, and this one's limited to 20 miles an hour. Now, on one hand, that's great. You're going to have extra power and speed for things like hauling your groceries or your gear and yourself around on this bike. But on the other hand, a trike can be unstable when you're in hard cornering, especially a 90-degree corner. So what we just kind of say as a general rule of thumb, and riding it all week, it just kept kind of reinforcing itself to me, and that's keep things slow in the corners. It's very easy to feel good on straights and flats and just cruising along on this bike. And if you think you're going to take a quick turn, well, you will, but you're probably gonna go flying off the other side of the bike. So if you're gonna ride the bike in cornering situations, definitely reduce your speed below. I found myself slowing down to below 10 miles an hour for a 90-degree corner. And if it's just a bend in the road, keeping things to no more than about 12, that just made me feel comfortable and the bike felt much more stable. Now, another way you can mitigate that and just deal with it in general is Mokwheel offers two ways to deal with your speeds. Now, on the first front, you've got your traditional PAS 1 through 5. Level 1 pedal assistance being the lowest level and just easy going, and number 5 being the highest with the most amount of power. And then along each step of the way, they limit the speeds at each level. So you might be going 5-10 miles an hour in PAS 1 and 2, no more than about 15 or so in PAS 3 and 4, and then no more than 20 in 4 and 5, although they have their own individual set speed limits. And that does a good job of keeping you in control. I say keep it on PAS 3. You'll still be over 10 miles an hour up to about 15, but you're not going to have those high speeds that kind of create unstable conditions in cornering. But they also do one other thing that's just very unique to the e-bike world, and Mokwheel's now done it on their last 3 releases, and that's have a feature in the display called intensity setting, and I'll show you in just a second how to access that and how to adjust it. But what it does is very cool. So it's got a meter like 1 through 5, just like the PAS settings, but it's completely separate, and it's the more overarching power of the bike. So if I change the intensity setting down to 1, I still have all 5 levels of PAS or pedal assistance, but they are greatly reduced, slower start off the line, more gradual acceleration instead of punchy acceleration. And then if I go all the way to number 5 on intensity, then it's strictly, spinning tires as soon as you hit the gas. So while it's not a performance-oriented bike, if you put that intensity setting on number 5, it's gonna do its best to go as fast as it can, and I definitely wouldn't be using that often on a trike. I say set the motor intensity setting to 1 when you first get it. Just get used to how it feels, how it corners, your comfort level on it. And then when you're ready for more speed, bump that intensity setting to 2 or 3 and you're good to go. I would just be careful about going to 4 and 5 because they get very punchy, and on a trike, that can just be an ugly situation. Now, when it comes to the battery on the trike, we have a fully integrated frame battery. It's 48 volts, it's got 15 amps, and that makes it a 720 watt-hour battery, and it's UL 2271 certified. Now, this battery can be removed for off-the-bike charging or just storage reasons, and I'll show you how that works now. So anytime you buy one of these bikes, it's gonna come with a set of keys, just like your car has. You're gonna put it in the key slot, turn it about a quarter turn north or forward, and you'll see the battery pop out. There it goes, and that will allow you just to simply remove it, take it off for charging, storage, whatever you want to do, take it in the house at night, and then you can simply just put it back and push it in until it clicks, and you're good to go. Now, having that as a security feature is always good, and just having the bike to take off for charging, or if you're going into work and you don't want to leave it, it's just a nice feature to have in general. Now, when it comes to range, they say this battery and motor combo on this bike will get up to 55 miles on a single charge. Now, I took this for a range test, and I didn't feel like doing a minimum range test because it's just very slow on this bike, and it could be a 4 or 5 hour trip. And I also didn't want to do it on PAS5 because 20 miles an hour for a constant speed around corners, that would not be a fun range test either. So I opted to go with a PAS level 3, and that gave me a good middle of the road with speeds ranging from 13 to 15 miles an hour. And I was able to get 41 miles on a single charge for a couple hours of ride time. So all in all, a great experience with range, and they did a good job in that department. So when it comes to the components on the Granite, things are set up in a traditional way as far as numbers go, but a slightly untraditional way as far as placement because of the tricycle frame just not being a typical two-wheeled bike. So they went with a 7-speed drivetrain, and as you can see, there's no cassette or cog or chain here next to the tire like you're used to seeing, and that's because it runs from the chain ring up front, and it's centered in between these 2 rear wheels along with the cassette and the motor. Now, in the rear on that cassette, it's an 11 to 28 tooth rear cassette, and that's linked to a 44 tooth front chain ring, which has a nice chain guard on it, and that's mated to 170 millimeter crank arms, and they did include pedals that are just flat plastic black pedals that do have some traction studs and reflectors for visibility. Now, when it comes to braking, they went with hydraulic disc brakes, which is nothing new, but the way they implement them was pretty cool. So up front, we have a traditional 2-piston caliper mated to a 160 millimeter rotor, and in the rear we have the same thing. Each tire has a 160 rotor and a 2-piston caliper. But the way they ran 2 brakes in the rear was kind of unique. The front brake line or hydraulic hose goes to that front wheel, and the rear one on the right side, about halfway down, runs to a hydraulic line splitter, and they ran both lines to both tires. So one pull of the right-hand side brake lever gives you braking power with some good modularity on both rear wheels. And frankly, I'm gonna be honest, when I saw this bike ship at 100 pounds and I saw 2-piston calipers with 160 rotors, my initial reaction was that it's just not gonna be enough stopping power. At least on paper, that's what I thought. But I was actually really surprised to ride this and find out that 160 rotors and 2-piston calipers, when all 3 wheels are engaged, is actually very good stopping power. And all in all, the brakes on this are really solid. Now, they're made by Zoom. It's a relatively lesser known brand, but I've seen them around for years, and these brakes performed very well. So no complaints on the braking at all. Now, one cool feature about the brakes is up on the right-hand side on your brake lever, you have a little switch, and that switch will activate when you depress the brake. You can activate it and it will essentially lock that brake on. I just call it the parking brake of the bike, and I think it works great. It's just a nice feature to have on a bike that can easily just kind of roll away on its own if you're not on even ground. So as you can guess, Mokwheel went with a relatively comfortable setup across the board. We've got the 3-inch wide tires, we've got the front suspension fork, and then we've got this nice wide saddle. It's got reinforced cushioning on it. It's super wide. It also has a backrest that has a loosened adjustability here that you can raise up or down. And then it's sitting on a suspension seat post for some flex while you're riding. So I've kind of played with it on gravel out here, going off of curbs, just kind of seeing how the bike feels. And while it may not be a performance machine, it is certainly comfortable and easy on your body for harder impacts coming off curbs, potholes, dirt, chunks, things like that. The bike, it's certainly not an off-road machine, but it does a great job of just reducing all that felt impact. Now, speaking of that up front, that's partially due to the front suspension fork. So we have an unbranded front suspension fork that has 60 millimeters of travel. Now, this does not have any kind of lockout or preload, so there's no adjustability settings on it, but it's just a nice little feature up front with 60 millimeters of travel to eat up more impacts along that front edge of the bike. Up front here in the cockpit, so no traditional stem, and that's largely due to the folding aspect of the bike. So what we do have is a quick release lever with a telescoping stem here, and then this also folds down for when you fold the bike. So I won't go through all of it now, we'll be doing that in a second. Just wanted to show that to you to kind of give you just some context for why there's no adjustable stem or a true bike stem on here. Now, the handlebar itself is about 25 inches wide or around 630 millimeters. It is an alloy flat bar, pretty typical of a folding bike because it needs to be able to fold down with a low profile to the bike. Now, this does have about a 3-degree rise to it, but it really just feels like a flat bar in general. On both ends, you have Mokwheel branded lock-on ergonomic grips with some gel pads for comfort. On the right side, you have your push throttle, your brake lever with parking brake by Zoom, an over-the-bar Shimano index shifter for 7 speeds of your drivetrain. On the left side, you have your control buttons for your display pad and your Zoom left-handed or front tire brake lever. Now, right here in the center is your Mokwheel display, and let's jump into the specific details and just kind of give you a walkthrough of what you can and cannot adjust on the Mokwheel Granite. All right, so this is going to be your home screen or just kind of your central information display for everything you do on the Mokwheel Granite. Now, up in the center here, you've got your miles per hour. You can change that to kilometers per hour, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Over on either side of that, you have these battery level bars that will start to go down at the same time as the battery depletes. On the left here, you've got your trip meter. On the right, you've got your ride timer, and in the center is your PAS settings, which you'll see will just change as I hit the control pad buttons. Now, if you want to change settings about the bike, to change some basic settings like units of measurement, screen brightness, things like that, you will go into one menu, and then to go into more performance-oriented settings, things like speed limits and motor intensity and things like that, you'll go into a different menu. So to get to the basic menu, you're going to hold the up and down arrows on the control pad, and that will take you to the function settings. Now here you can adjust brightness of the display, change your unit of measurement, change your startup mode, reset your trip meter, change the language of the bike, and get the version information about the display. Now, to get into the performance settings, you're going to hold the up, down, and the light button. So up, down, and the light at the same time. And that's going to give us the technical settings. So here we can change things like the speed limit. Now, I went into this when I was just testing this week, and you'll see it's at 28 miles an hour. Now, it's shipped to me saying it was limited to 20 miles an hour. I was just doing testing to see if I could exceed that, and I'll let you know ahead of time. You can put this to whatever number you want. It's not going to go past 20 miles an hour, which is a good thing on a trike. Now, that timed out, so let me jump back in there. And so to get out of that, you can just click down and we will go to the power assisted gear, and that just lets you pick how many levels of PAS. You can have 3 levels, you can have 5 levels, and that's where you make that adjustment. Here's your voltage level you can adjust. Then you can change your wheel diameter. In the odd occurrence, you change the wheel size. This is where you can adjust how many magnets are sensing for the cadence sensor. Here you can go into riding mode where you can pick between only pedal assist or only throttle or both, like most e-bikes are. It's currently set in both, and most e-bikes you see are in both. Intensity setting was that feature I talked about where you can adjust the motor's overall power delivery. So at level 1, it'd be super relaxed, and you can still go through all 5 levels of assistance. It'll just be a much more dialed back power level and more gradual acceleration rather than punchy and fast. Or you can go to level 5 and make it pretty much as fast as the bike is capable of, just always that warning about cornering high speeds in a trike. Now, the last thing on here is going to be a factory reset. So should in the event you have some software issues or the company reaches out and says, yeah, just try a reset, that's where you'll do that. And then hitting the light button just takes you back to the home screen. Now, Mokwheel does not have an app or any kind of phone integration for this bike or any of their bikes as far as I know. So that really does just make up the display in general and all the controls and functions you can adjust. This screen is bright enough and durable enough that I've been able to see it in direct sunlight, and it's got a nice thick bevel around it just to help protect it from impacts and things like that. All in all, it's a new upgraded display that Mokwheel's using, and I like it a lot. It's been really clear, really clean, and just a good display overall. Now, when we talk folding bikes, most of you are going to think of the smaller form factor bikes, things like Bromptons, Electrics, or maybe Mokwheel's Slate. Those are much smaller form factors and they fold up to a smaller footprint in general. Now, this still does fold and it will get into a smaller footprint in general, but I just want to make it known that no matter how much folding we do on this bike, it's still a 100-pound trike and it's still going to have a large footprint. This just makes it a little bit easier to put in a tighter spot should you need to do that. And also know in advance, just kind of heading into it, and as you'll see when I fold it, it's not, just because of its sheer size and dimensions, it's not the easiest bike to kind of fold and maneuver around your house. So just keep that in mind should you think you're maybe going to fold it and just easily move it somewhere. It's still 100 pounds and it's still kind of a large, awkward size. Now to fold it, it's pretty simple. You're just simply going to, I'm going to lower this seat. I'm going to fold down the stem by releasing this stem latch here, and that folds it down by its side. And then the main latch is here in the center. You just release the latch and that allows you to open up the frame. Now, when I do that, that will allow me to bring the tire back. And that's really the extent of the fold. You can't bring it all the way back. It can't go in any other directions. And in this smaller form factor, this is about 36 inches wide, 37 inches tall, and about 43 inches long. So still a decent footprint, but it does let you get the bike in a tighter spot. All right, guys, here it is, Mokwheel Granite Trike. So we're gonna go for a ride, but I just wanted to show you some of the things I noticed, just kind of first impressions of some things I was playing with and wanted to show you guys. So first things, there's this massive cargo box in the rear, holds up to 220 pounds. That part is fantastic, and I think it's centered over these rear wheels is really good as well. Plus, I don't know if you guys can see it. Well, maybe we'll put footage up there, but there's individual hydraulic disc brakes on all three wheels because they ran a hydraulic splitter back here, which is really cool. Now, for this rack, they did give you this strap so you could like put your stuff down, and the reason why it's like separated is because it has like a little adjustment part on here, but it's too big to, it's like too long. Even when you collapse it all the way, it just kind of would fall off or get stuck in the wheels. So for now, I'm going to just wrap it up and set it down in there because we won't be taking a load with us. Right in there, you can probably see the hub drive. Here is your folding mechanism, which I don't know if you can tell, but there is some scratches there, probably from just us folding it, unfolding it, messing with it, but something to keep in mind. I don't know if that was from the fold itself or just us playing with it. Now up front, the fork, it does its job, but I did notice there is some maybe flex or play just in this front end, kind of the overall design of the geometry. Something to keep in mind, especially cornering at higher speeds. I don't want to see people falling or kind of getting unstable. So this is something I would definitely not recommend cornering fast with, but I would say that on any trike in general, just something to keep in mind with that little bit of flex up front. But let's go for a ride and see how she does. So one thing that's really cool, right here, there is a little e-brake, which I think is our parking brake, whatever you want to call it, which is nice. It keeps the bike in place, and then you can release it and go. So let's just kind of take off. We're in PAS 5. And so I'm going to start by pedaling, and there it goes. You can feel that. I'm going to say it is a cadence sensor because I definitely felt it jump right off the line. Let's find a way onto our paths here, and then we will get on the trail and do some riding. So plenty of power, especially for a trike. I mean, you can really feel it punch off the line pretty quick, and that's nice. Busy day at the pickleball court. So I did play with the top speed on this, and I was not able to get over 18 miles an hour. They say up to 20. Maybe that has to do with rider weight. I'm about 180 pounds. But let's see what we can get right now. We do have a full charge. Let's go up to PAS 5. Look left, we're clear. Nobody coming onto the bridge. All right, let's go. So we're full throttle right now, PAS 5, and 17, 18, 18.2 I saw a peak at. Yeah, so still 18 miles an hour is top speed. But for a trike, I think that's totally respectable. is not something you want to be going 28 miles an hour on. And speaking of safety and speed, let's talk about brakes. So 3 brakes on all 3 wheels, which I think is really cool. Let's check the stopping power from 18. 3, 2, 1, stop. So nice stopping power there. I think the brakes actually feel really good for this bike. Again, the only thing I'm really noticing that's standing out as kind of a concern is just a little bit of flex here in this front end. You might be able to see it. Just something to keep in mind. So the 500 watt motor in the rear, it's 500 watts nominally, but it has 860 watts peaking, which is really solid. On your left. Thank you. You're okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. She complimented the bike. I'm out here turning heads on this thing. All right, so we are in intensity setting 1, and we can change that. So the intensity setting is basically telling the motor I want it to be as punchy as possible or as dialed back as possible. So let's go ahead and go into those settings. I'm going to hold all 3 buttons, the light and PAS up and down, and that takes us to technical settings. We can go into speed limit, which, by the way, I tried bumping that up to 28 just to see, and the bike's still capped at 18 miles an hour. So let's go down to intensity setting. Oh, we are on 5. So as you can see, I was talking about being punchy. That's because we were in the highest setting. So let's go down to 1 and we'll talk about it there. So that's set on 1. We'll get out of the menu by hitting the headlight button, and then I'll hit the much more gradual, slow acceleration. And I really think that's where this bike will shine, especially for new riders or people who are just a little unsure about the e-bike itself. That's one thing Mokwheel does. For the last 3 bikes I've reviewed from them, they have this intensity setting. It just allows you to kind of dial in the motor's feel, and it's much more, I'd say, realistic and accurate feeling than the PAS levels. The PAS levels, they kind of cap themselves at certain speeds, but you still generally have the motor's all or nothing power. But with this motor intensity setting, it kind of lets you just control the overall speed of the bike. Now pedaling it, I am pedaling it right now with my legs and the PAS on, so it's kind of jumping speeds real quick. I'm going to slow it down. But I do notice pedaling is possible on this. It's no issue, feels fine. But I will say at higher speeds, let's do it now. We're in 7th gear now. Let's bump this up to 20. All right, so we're in 20. If I start pedaling, I guess I have a little bit left of resistance. So not ghost pedaling, it's geared good. The gear range is fine. And then again, these brakes are actually surprisingly good. The front fork, you cannot lock it out or adjust preload. It kind of just is what it is, the way it ships. And all in all, I think the 65 Newton meters of torque on this 860 peaking watts, it's very strong for a trike, but it's also capped at 18 miles an hour, so it's not like you're going to go crazy on this. I would just always be careful about turning. When you turn, I find myself wanting to like counterbalance by moving my body weight around. Because you kind of get this feeling like it will tip, even though there's no wheel off the ground. It's just something to think about when you're cornering on a trike. And that's going to be specific to all trikes. A 3-wheel design just requires you to kind of be aware of weight when you corner. But I think 18 miles an hour is a good top speed for this. I think the 3-wheel braking is really nice. The 65 Newton meters of torque works really well for this bike. And in general, that 220-pound load over the rear wheel is a very solid cargo setup. All right, guys, we are here with Ben, our in-house mechanic. Now, Ben has like 20 years of wrenching on bikes. He's seen a lot of trends come and go, and he just has a really good grasp of what makes a solid bike tick. So every time we do a review, we run it by him and just get the thoughts on it, some things he likes, some things he would improve, just to kind of give you guys some more context about the bike. But Ben, I'm gonna let you do your thing. I just wanna say thank you first to Feedback Sports for providing their Pro HD aluminum rack, as well as some of their tools. If you guys like to wrench on bikes, these Pro HD racks are very solid and stable and fairly lightweight for what it is, especially the size of it. So if you guys wanna check that stuff out or you like to tinker on your bikes, I will put a link down in the description. And Ben, I'm gonna jump out of your way. Just start off with what you like about the Mokwheel Granite.
All right, thanks, Mike. First things first, as far as the stem goes and the body position or the rider position, I do like that it's a telescoping adjustable stem. That just means if you're a taller rider or you've got longer arms or you just prefer to have a higher handlebar setup, you can certainly adjust for that. And then also on the other side of the coin, if you're a shorter rider and you want it just to fit a little lower, then you can adjust that really easy just with the quick release lever, adjust, tighten it back up, good to go. Another thing that I really like about this is because it's a hydraulic brake, typically you're only going to get a brake on each side, one on the front, one on the back, but with this one it's got a splitter right behind the bottom bracket. So what that does is it splits the lines and makes it so that you've got a hydraulic clamp, or a hydraulic brake rather, on both of the rear wheels. So now you get 3 brake surfaces to slow down. I think that's a great idea. Just much more braking control. Also, this one features a parking brake. That's a great idea. If you've got a couple pounds of groceries or something in the back, maybe a small dog, you want to park for a second or just stop pedaling and not have to worry about the trike rolling away, just pull the parking brake, set to go, not going to move anywhere. With a bike like this, you've got weight in the back, and the overall weight on this one I think is around 100 pounds. So it's nice to have a bigger, wider tire with wider rims so you can adjust the air pressures to make a nice smooth ride no matter the cargo load on this one.
Nice. And what kind of things would you improve on the Granite?
Great question, Mike. We'll start with the front end. There's a couple of things that I think Mokwheel could do to raise the stability of the bike, or just the front end stiffness, all right? So with this one, I'll recommend that Mokwheel considers a rigid fork. So with this suspension fork, there's 3 things that are they can change. It doesn't have any adjustment to the spring rate, that's one, and it's nice to have an adjustable fork. It doesn't feature a lockout, which is also another thing that's great to have with forks. The slider or stanchion diameter is very, very narrow on this bike. So with any kind of weight in the back, or even at 10 or 12 miles per hour, the front end just feels wiggly and kind of wobbly. And I think if it was with a rigid fork going away from this, it would feel a lot better. On that same note, the headset, this is the headset here, where the stem, the fork interact with the frame. This, I don't know if it has bearings. It's very common for every bike to have adjustability and bearings in here so that you get a nice smooth feel and it accepts shock and weight and everything. I think these are just pressed in aluminum cups, and what that means for a rider is when you're out on the road and cruising along, it's gonna have some side-to-side movement just because it's not, you can't tighten it. So that with the fork, I think that they could do a little bit better right there. With this, it does have a 7-speed shift system, which is nice if you're in a really hilly area. However, the grade of the Shimano componentry on this trike in particular is pretty entry level, I guess would be the best way to say it. So when you consider a 7-speed drivetrain that's not very nice, and then a seat with this kind of design, it doesn't look like it's really made to pedal that far. When you pedal this, the seat will end up hitting you back on your hamstrings, and it kind of feels uncomfortable. Only point I'm making here is I think that they could save a few dollars, offer it at a less expensive cost, and just do a single speed on this trike. It will work great. Quieter, less problems, etc. One thing we found when we're folding and unfolding this trike is the wiring right here at the clamp and the hinge. Doesn't have any protective plastic or anything around it. So as we've opened it and closed it a few times for testing, assembling it, moving it around, we found that it is very easy to pinch the wires and then expose the inner wires. So it would do them a great favor to put some sort of a safety protector around those things, so when it's opened and closed, it doesn't pinch any wires. The overall weight of this bike is, again, around 100 pounds, and I think that they could, rather than using steel for the basket in the rear, if Mokwheel used aluminum, it would lighten the entire trike up by probably 5 pounds. I think you're going to notice 5 pounds on a bike a trike that's this heavy, so an aluminum rack also I think would be a great idea with this one. The one last thing that I'll pick on, and I've said it a couple of times before, I'm not really sure what these rack mounts are for, other than putting a rack on. However, if you put a front rack on here, it will interfere with the light, add weight, and compress the fork. But then otherwise, it doesn't look all that nice, and I just wish they would go away. That's being picky, of course, but that's about all I've got to say on this one, Mike.
Awesome, Ben. Hey, man, I thank you for taking the time and just kind of giving us your thoughts on the Mokwheel Granite.
All right, thanks.
All right guys, so there it is, the Mokwheel Granite electric tricycle. Pretty well done overall. It's gonna be great for those of you looking for an electric tricycle because you're going to just want to avoid the whole balance, stability, concerns that come with a two-wheel bike, or maybe just back concerns throwing your leg over a two-wheel bike. Electric trikes have a lot of use case and they keep things very comfortable, very easy to do, and frankly, they're just kind of fun to ride around on. Now, sure, there's things that could always be improved. There was a little front end flex that I showed you guys during the ride quality, and in general, 20 miles an hour on electric trike is just kind of fast, and we recommend just dialing that back in those speed settings here in the display like I showed you, just to make sure you can get and grow with the bike and learn it without kind of having any unexpected surprises. But all in all, the bike performed well in our testing. The brakes were really solid and the power is more than enough for most people, and it's got the flexibility to fold it up should you need to move it to a slightly smaller space. So guys, if you have any questions or anything I missed in this review that you just want answered, or you just want to make fun of my clothes, drop a comment down below. I will do my best to respond to all of you. And until the next review, we'll see you guys out on the trail.